Welcome to the Black Swan Rising podcast, an L10 production. For transcriptions, show notes, and extras, please visit us at theblackswanrisingpodcast.com. Now, broadcasting across the world from the heart of the American Bible Belt, here is your host, Michael B. Rush.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Black Swan Rising podcast. I am your host, Michael B. Rush. On today's episode, I want to drill into a clip of an interview that came out just a couple of days ago between Representative or Congresswoman Luna from Florida, I believe, and a Fox News anchor. And the Fox News anchor uses some vernacular that some of you may not be familiar with, so I just want to clarify it up front. She is talking about UAPs, which, most people refer to as UFOs. It's just the new term that the government is using because I guess UFO has too much stigma associated with it. So when they are referring to UAPs, think UFOs. Also, at the beginning of the interview, Fox News says time space, referring to interdimensional beings traveling using what she refers to as time space. I think what she is trying to say is they're getting here by manipulating space time. So keep that in mind. And without further ado, listen to this little clip and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
Luna, thank you very much, Congressman. It's good to have you with us today. I want to go back to that. You told Joe Rogan in a podcast in August when you were discussing all of this that you have viewed evidence of interdimensional beings here on Earth and that they operate through the time spaces that we currently have. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think that a good example would be some of the photo visual evidence that we've seen directly in some of these classified briefings that will now be made public. One of the famously now, I guess, infamous videos that we showed in one of our hearings was actually a video that was dead dropped to Eric Burleson, who's a member of Congress from within the Department of War. And it shows a UAP, an unidentified aerial phenomena, deflecting a Hellfire missile. This was taken off of ISR footage off the coast of, I believe it was Yemen. So long story short, there have been briefings that we've received as Congress that leads us to believe that, yes, there is definitely an advanced technology out there that's not created by mankind. And yes, of course, we've seen other evidence where it could potentially be UAPs, and then we later find out that there's drones. But there is a certain amount of evidence that we simply can't explain. Some of the physics that are defied in how these vehicles operate are very interesting to note. And we are not the only government that's, looked into this extensively. But I really do look at this from a lens of national security. And as you know, as we continue to evolve specifically on the front of AI and drone technology, we have to ensure that are these things, whatever they may be, are they potential adversarial weapons, advanced weapons, or not? And I think the whole aspect that the federal government can deny access to members of Congress, of which has happened not just to myself, but to other members of Congress as well, is not just alarming, but it's also something that cannot truly exist in a free and fair society. Government should not operate in secrecy. And so I look forward to the American people being able to determine their own conclusion after they've seen some of the evidence that we have seen. But most recently, Representative Gates actually came forward. He was on that initial CODAL with me and Representative Tim Burchett, where we were denied access. And he will tell you that if you've seen some of the stuff that we've seen, you will too become a believer.
So, it's fascinating. And, so you're saying that the Air Force has covered up UAP sightings. So, if there is potentially, is it because it's technology that we have that they don't want anyone to know that we have militarily? Or is it that it's a foreign actor who has some abilities in technology and things that spin in ways that we can't understand?
Based on our interviews that we've conducted, not just in person, but also given some of the testimony that we've received, we do have reason to believe that this tech is not created by mankind. However, it is also possible that there are certain advanced weapons that the U.S. government may have that they're denying us access to. But here's the problem. When you have unelected bureaucrats denying access to members of government that are supposed to oversee and write the checks for that federal spending, and then we're also getting reports that there are people being threatened, whether it be physically, whether there have been, interesting deaths associated with people that have been coming forward as whistleblowers, which has been brought up in some of the testimony that we've received, not just myself, but you saw recently there was a movie that came out, The Age of Disclosure, where this was also referenced now by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. This is one of the most bipartisan and bicameral things in Washington, D.C. And so we definitely are looking forward to sharing this and exploring this further with the American people.
Wow. So here we have a sitting congresswoman talking about technology that she has seen that is of non-human origin. She is saying that her and many of her colleagues have seen a lot of evidence and they are believers. And she is saying, listen, if you had seen the things that we had seen, you would be a believer too. Now, this is something that I think everybody needs to listen to and to take serious because, what do you do with this? You just write her off and say, no, she's lying. She's just trying to get attention. I mean, I don't think that is what's going on. Everyone that's coming into Congress is lying. I mean, come on. That is being intellectually disingenuous. If that's what you're saying, you need to pull your head out of the sand and wake up to the reality that is around you. Now, I know that a lot of people are thinking, well, this simply can't be possible because the physics don't add up. And even in this interview, Congresswoman Luna mentions that these things are defying the laws of physics as we understand them. Well, I want to spend some time on the podcast today talking about just this. So I recently came across a bunch of declassified documents from they're referred to as Defense Intelligence Reference Documents. I'm looking at 6 of them right now. And these documents, they're each probably between, 30, usually 40 to 60 pages long. And they talk about some incredible things. Let me just read you some of the titles of these documents. Transversible wormholes, stargates, and negative energy. That's one document. There's another one. The space communication implications of quantum entanglement and non-locality. Very interesting. Here's another one. Anti-gravity for aerospace applications. Here's another one. Concept for extracting energy from the quantum vacuum. Here's another one. Negative mass propulsion. Quantum tomography of negative energy states in the vacuum. And lastly, quantum computing and utilizing organic molecules in automation technology. These are some very interesting titles. And there's these documents are pretty dense. And so what I did is I took them and let's see, how many do I, there's 7 of them. I took 7 of these, dumped them into AI, and then started asking questions to AI about these things. And the answers that I was getting were just astounding. And I wanted to talk to you about those today. So one of the things that kind of led me down this rabbit hole was the Age of Disclosure documentary. And in that documentary, there were some scientists that worked for the government on top secret programs, and they were speaking in the documentary about their theories for how these UFOs, which are most definitely here, how they're operating. And they said that they believe that when these things are operating, they're creating a bubble in space-time, and that the craft is within that bubble. And from an outside observer, they are always going to look kind of fuzzy. And that's because when you're trying to take a picture of these objects, you're literally trying to take a picture of something through space-time, and it distorts it. But that because if these objects were able to create these space-time bubbles, they would be able to essentially operate independently from all of the outside factors, including gravity and our atmosphere and things like that. So they described that when these things would move, they would literally, ride on a wave of space-time, which would theoretically enable them to travel faster than light because they are moving space-time. And that's pretty incredible. It would also enable them to, accelerate at insane speeds and stop on a dime and, turn at a 90-degree angle while you're going super fast and not experience any of the consequences of those forces that you would definitely experience if not for the space-time protection of the space-time bubble. Now, another thing that I thought was fascinating was they mentioned that these objects could be significantly larger than they appear. For example, an orb that appeared to be the size of a basketball could, in reality, house an object within the basketball-shaped sphere or the space-time bubble that was much larger than even, say, a football stadium. That the inside the space-time bubble, reality operates differently than it is perceived as being by the outside observer. So that was very interesting as well. Another thing that they said is that because of this space-time bubble, time would literally or could pass differently inside of the space-time bubble than outside of the space-time bubble. And they postulated that this was the reason that many folks that encounter these things feel like they have missed time, because when you go in and out of one of these space-time bubbles, time is passing literally at a different speed. And you could be inside one of these space-time bubbles and step out of it and feel that you've only been gone for a couple moments, when in reality you've been gone for hours and hours. So that's, pretty interesting. But when I loaded all of these things into AI, I was primarily interested in understanding how wormholes could work and how, if it would be possible from a theoretical perspective to be able to travel through time. Because from a theoretical, well, I'm not sure that theoretical is the right word here. In the scriptures, God is on record as giving people visions of things that have happened in the past and in the future. And for him to be able to do those things, he's got to be able to see through time. And we know, from the scriptures that they speak of, time, all time being present before God, past, present, and future. So curiously enough, when I started asking these questions, I started getting some really interesting answers. And I was told that there are basically two types of wormholes. There is a wormhole where information can pass through, and there's a wormhole that you could literally step through, like a doorway. And they operate with different physics. And in order to stabilize a wormhole so that you could walk through it, you need something that is called negative energy or exotic matter. And what that does is, because the wormhole and wormholes, it's just a part of, Einstein's theory of general relativity. Wormholes should in fact exist. And in fact, we have observed things that appear to be like wormholes when stars collapse. But the gravity, the force of gravity would collapse these wormholes and make it impossible for physical objects to transverse them unless there was some sort of exotic matter or negative energy that could stabilize the two mouths of the wormhole on either end. And then you could literally step through a wormhole and be in a different location. Now, you may recall that Brigadier General Haim Eshed, who was the Israeli man that designed the Iron Dome, he stated that he had seen portals open up on Skinwalker Ranch and crafts fly through these portals. And on the other side of the portal, they could clearly see it was night at Skinwalker Ranch, and the portal opened up and you could see that it was day on the other side, and you could see buildings and things like that. And these things flew right on through. And then the portal closed in on itself. Now, he said that they saw these things, that they observed them. So he knows that they're real. And he went on to state that we are very close to being able to create stable wormholes using the collider that exists over in Europe. And, I think that it's fascinating for many reasons, because it opens up not only the possibility that you can transverse the immensity of space instantaneously by creating these wormholes, but it also facilitates or opens the door for time travel. Because what these documents were talking about, and there are many scientists that actually believe that this phenomenon that we are observing, or these, unidentified aerial phenomenon, there are many people that think that these are literally time travelers from the future manifesting in our reality through some sort of time travel. And so in these documents, basically they say that and this is where this gets, kind of into the crazy world of quantum physics, but, gravity is, actually capable of bending space-time. And if you were to alter the gravity on one end of a theoretical wormhole, and on the other end, you had, negative gravity. So really strong gravity on one side and negative gravity on the other side. And you could amp those up to infinity either way. You could effectively go back or forward in time without any problem. And as long as you could keep the wormhole open. But you could, even if you weren't keeping the wormhole open, there are still these other kinds of wormholes where information can pass through and they don't manifest. The physical throat of the wormhole wouldn't manifest, but an observer would be able to view the past or the future as if they were there. But the people that were there in the past or in the future would not be cognizant that they were being observed in this manner. And to me, that sounds like a way that God could be revealing visions of the future or the past to people by manipulating space-time. And it's just amazing to read some of these documents and how they are laying out the groundwork for how they it's the theoretical groundwork for how these things that they are observing might actually be happening. Now, one of the things that comes to the surface when you are looking at the energy demands to create an energy or a space-time bubble of this magnitude, it's astronomical. They were mentioning that it would be multiples of the amount of power that is produced by the United States. And so the question is, where are they getting the power to do these things? Because they're clearly doing them. And this is where this paper on the concepts for extracting energy from the quantum vacuum comes into play. Because according to this, and I've after reading this paper, I tried to dig into this a lot more. For the layperson, and I am definitely a layperson, we tend to believe that space is a vacuum, that it's empty. But in reality, at the quantum level, space is anything but empty. It is filled with quantum fields, energy fields. And apparently there are 17 different kinds of energy fields that are omnipresent. We're talking about things like electromagnetic fields. We're talking about, fermion fields. We're talking about Higgs fields. Now, if you're not familiar with quantum physics or the theory behind quantum physics, these may sound, like Greek. But the fact of the matter is there is energy pervasive in space. And in fact, according to quantum field theory, the amount of energy that exists in the vacuum of space in 1 square meter of space is astonishingly massive. So massive, in fact, that the universe itself should not be able to exist because there's so much energy in 1 square meter. I believe the number that I looked at was 10 to the power of 120 joules per square meter of energy in the vacuum of space. Now, this is like saying that in a glass of water, there are like 1 billion times the volume of all of the oceans located in the glass. It's something that is that bonkers. However, there is some pervasive, omnipresent, counteracting force that suppresses this or negates this almost perfectly, but not quite. And the residual of this non-negated impact is manifest throughout the cosmos in the form of dark energy or dark matter. And I think it's just amazing to contemplate these things, because of course, when I am looking out at the vastness of space and the quantum forces that are at work here, I go back to the light of Christ, which is, for all intents and purposes, the power of God. And we're told that the light of Christ permeates the immensity of space. It's in everything, and it's the power by which everything operates. And that without it, nothing could exist, that it's the power by which the suns operate and that the earths were formed, and that it's literally the power of God. Now, according to quantum field theory, they don't know what this mysterious counteracting force is. They only know that it has to be there because this energy, has to be there. And it's being negated somehow. So I think, what if, this is a theory that I am, postulating, what if that counteractive force is, if it isn't the light of Christ, it most definitely is controlled by it. But if you could just pull it back a little bit, you have access to essentially an inexhaustible source of raw power. And the scientists in these documents refer to this field that's, has this incredible power as the quantum vacuum, or sometimes it's referred to as 0-point energy field. And that if you could tap into this 0-point energy field, you could operate these crafts without any, other need for fuel of any kind, because there is so much power available in the universe that if you have the means to access it, you would need no other power source. You don't need, nuclear fission. You don't need gas. You don't need electricity. All you need is this 0-point energy that is everywhere at all times. It's as pervasive throughout the universe as the light of Christ is. And so there is something called the Casimir effect. And what they do, and this is how they demonstrate that this quantum field of energy is actually there. So all, energy, you can essentially, and it may be, and I'm sure that it probably is far more complex than this, but for me to be able to wrap my mind around it, I think of energy as vibration, right? So the faster something is moving, the more energy that it has, the hotter that it would be. The slower something is moving, the cooler it would be, and the less amount of energy. This kind of idea plays out with wavelengths of light on the various spectrums. The higher the wavelength, or the sharper those waves and troughs are, the more energy it has. And the wider those troughs are spread out, the cooler it is from a temperature perspective. So it's going to look different when you observe it. So at a quantum level, it's the same. You have all of these different fields are vibrating. And if you think about, and again, this is me just trying to hack my way through this stuff that is way beyond my pay grade. So if you actually understand this stuff much better than I do, please don't be offended by my hackosaurusness through this stuff. But I think about it this way: when you wear polarized sunglasses, the reason those are working is because they are only allowing light waves of certain properties through the glasses. So it cuts down on UV light, things like that. A microwave, microwaves, it's actually on the light spectrum. It would be highly detrimental to us if we were being bombarded constantly with microwaves. The microwave in your kitchen, you notice that it's got that little screen on it. That little screen makes it so that the microwaves themselves cannot get out of the microwave. They're filtering it. So what this Casimir effect is they essentially think of it like taking two metal plates and putting them close together so that they block the vibrations of these different energy fields from transversing through the plates. So the idea is that you put these two plates like that, and then that creates a quantum vacuum, right? So you're already in a, from a big mass, perspective. That's when we're calling space a vacuum. We're saying there's not, it doesn't have an atmosphere. It's it doesn't mean that it's devoid of molecules. There are molecules, around in space. So, you can see the space dust, the ice. There's different things like that. It doesn't mean that it's devoid of that. It's just that there is far less there than anywhere else. But there's essentially the same amount of this quantum energy there. But if you could take these plates there, you would create a real vacuum. And when you have, or a quantum vacuum within the vacuum of space, and that would create energy or a force that you might be able to tap into. Think of it, and again, this is probably a terrible analogy, but when you can create force by just displacing other forces, such as the displacement of air over an airplane wing. What creates the lift is causing the air above the wing to move more distance than the air below the wing. And that causes lift and literally pulls the airplane, despite it weighing many, many tons, up into the air. So the idea of extracting energy from this quantum vacuum is based off of something like this Casimir effect, because they can demonstrate that there is a force out there, and that this is how they know that the quantum field theory is real. And all of this stuff is pretty darn cool, because just think about it. If you had access to this kind of energy, imagine what your society would look like. What would your buildings look like? What would your infrastructure look like? You wouldn't need to have roads. You wouldn't need to have power lines. Many of the things that we look at and point at as being signs of an advanced society may be completely absent from a society that is able to use this kind of power. So let's imagine that there are societies that are like this, and they are on the far stretches of the Milky Way galaxy. Let's say that they're at the center. We're on the, one of the outer bands of the Milky Way galaxy. And the Milky Way galaxy is, enormous. It's about 100,000 light years across and contains about 100 billion different solar systems. So you can imagine that life on any of those worlds, if they had the technology, it wouldn't be a issue of distance for someone who could bend space-time and literally create a portal or a wormhole and go through the other side, and voila, there you are. Because as Brigadier General Haim Eshed said, they were literally opening up portals on Skinwalker Ranch and walking through, and on the other side, who knows how far away that was. But they weren't flying from point A to point B. They're literally just bending space-time and stepping through. So the Milky Way galaxy is enormous on the one hand, but if you can do that, distance becomes meaningless, because literally you can just transverse it at will. So that opens up a bunch of doors that become very, very interesting to explore. Now, recently we have had President Trump, I'm not sure if you have been following this or not, but he's come out and said that he is going to disclose all of the UFO-related files that the government has, and he's going to order Pete Hegseth and the defense branch to release everything that they've got. And according to all of these whistleblowers, we have a lot. So we could be learning some very interesting things in the very near future. And I think that if any of this has a modicum of truth to it, then some of the ancient mysteries begin to make much more sense, particularly the Book of Enoch, because the Book of Enoch states clearly that Earth has been visited literally almost from the beginning of time. Now, also, you take the Book of Enoch and you look at what it says. I mean, it's literally talking about portals opening up in the sky and monsters coming through them. Enoch stated that he saw the Leviathan and Behemoth coming through portals in the last days, and that they would devour the earth's inhabitants. That's that's crazy to consider, but it seems like it's possible with these kinds of things, and it's also very consistent with some of the things that Joseph Smith, as crazy as they sound, he has said that the beasts of Revelation are literal intelligent species that live apart from the human family that are coming and will have power to devour the earth's inhabitants in the last days. This also makes me think of some of the curious references that we have in the Bible when, for instance, Israel went astray and while they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and then of a sudden they have fiery flying serpents that apparently come out of nowhere and disappear back into that same mysterious void from whence they came. Who knows? I think that we may find out in the very near future that life in the universe is far more exciting and varied than any of us have dared to consider. I recently listened to a podcast where Dr. Stephen Greer was, a participant, and he's interviewed over 700 different government-related whistleblowers, and the people that he interviews, these are credible folks, and he says that there were people that years ago had, quantified close to 100 different alien species that had been visiting the planet. So you're talking all kinds of bizarre, highly intelligent creatures that are able to transverse the immensity of space, likely using the kinds of technologies that I have been theorizing and that are discussed in these defense intelligence reference documents that I've mentioned today. So I know that there's lots of people that they simply don't have a box for this. It cannot be true. Therefore, they just disregard anything that would suggest otherwise. But I think that if you can maintain an open mind, and I'm not asking you to believe all of these things that I've have talked about on this episode or any of the different episodes that we've had so far. I'm just asking you to try to maintain an open mind and to consider some of these things, because these aren't my ideas here. I'm trying to regurgitate some of these scientific documents that they have written right on their covers, acquisition threat support, meaning these guys are preparing for something, and they're not just preparing because they've seen Star Wars. They're preparing because they're observing phenomena in our skies and in our oceans and, frankly, out in space that cannot be explained through any other means. And they're trying to catch up, and we're operating, way behind. But just think about, how cool the coming days are going to be. And if we really are seeing some of these things, and again, Chris Bledsoe posted on his Facebook that the lady has mentioned that the earth is going to enter into a new phase of the divine feminine when the red star of Regulus appears above the horizon just before dawn in front of the Sphinx. And originally, Chris Bledsoe said that that was going to take place in April. He's now saying that folks from NASA are telling him that the red star of Regulus is going to hang just above the horizon in the gaze of the Sphinx at the end of August. And that's when he is now saying, he originally said April, but he's now saying the end of August. So I don't know. I don't know if weird things are going to happen then or not, but it's very interesting to consider all of this together and to look for patterns. And, friends, I personally have seen these things. So to me, it's not a question of whether or not they're here. I know they're here because I've seen them. And what I'm seeing are not military craft. With my wife at my side, I saw a strange craft flying around in the sky, probably 30,000 feet or so. And then it burst into flame and created a symbol in the sky, a crescent moon with 3 8-pointed asterisk stars on it. One at the top of the crescent, one at the bottom of the crescent, and one in the middle of the crescent, burning in the sky in flaming fire, so bright that it burned the image into my retinas. I could close my eyes and just stare at the image. My wife saw it too. Yeah, that is not anything normal. Okay, I've seen black. I saw a black triangle craft that was within probably 500-600 feet from me. It scared me to death. I have seen so many orbs of light in the sky that I have shot with my astronomy laser that can go 20 miles and had them shoot lights back at me that I know they're here. So the question becomes, how are they getting here? Because they are here. And, it's not just me. You've got all of these folks in Congress that are talking about seeing these things on a regular basis. You literally have thousands of eyewitness accounts of these kinds of crafts. Every year, you've got the Pentagon that is now investigating these things for Congress, and they are only supposed to be investigating crafts that are exhibiting characteristics of non-human intelligence, and they are still looking at hundreds of these. So, friends, somebody is here. There's probably lots of different groups here. The question is, how long is it going to remain that they're just kind of passively, looking at us from the skies versus some major disclosure taking place? President Trump's daughter-in-law came out on her podcast and stated that President Trump already has a speech prepared to announce the fact that we are not alone. So it's not a question of, is this going to happen? It seems to be a question of, when is this going to happen? Because there's a lot of forces and pressures that seem to be building up. So we need to have boxes for these things. And again, that is the entire purpose of this podcast. It's to provide boxes for some of the strange phenomena that are happening around us on a daily basis and are accelerating. They're happening more frequently, not less frequently. We need to open our minds more than ever. And we need to be able to reconcile these things with our spiritual paradigms, because I am very concerned that soon we will no longer have the luxury of just, shrugging these kinds of things off. I think that soon these things are going to be in our face, and people are going to be losing their faith at incredible rates because they simply don't have boxes for it. So please don't let that be you. You don't have to believe all of this, but you do need to get boxes for it. You can't wait until the last minute and think that when your heart is failing for fear for those things that you see coming upon the earth, to think that in that moment you're going to have your wits about you enough to make good decisions. I think that's a pipe dream. I think now is the time to prepare for these kinds of things. This is a grace period that we have, but I think it's running out. And that's why I'm doing these episodes. I'm hoping that these are beneficial to folks and that they're giving them a spiritual and intellectual framework with which they can approach something that society at large has just poo-pooed for so long and have effectively been able to just shrug the whole thing off by saying, oh, you're one of those, crazy guys. Well, friends, is everyone in Congress now crazy? Are, the vast majority of commercial pilots crazy because they're seeing things in the skies? I've talked to numerous air traffic controllers and I've asked them, hey, how often are you seeing strange things like this in the sky? And the typical response is every single day. So friends, think about that. Something's going on. It's all leading up to something. These sightings are becoming more frequent. We're not talking about the same, number of sightings that we typically get. We're talking about an exponential increase in these kinds of things. And there has to be a reason that these things are increasing. So let's prepare ourselves. Let's open our minds. Let's not be deceived by these things. I think that there are many people out there that have theories on these things that are totally crazy. And I realize that some of you think that I'm totally crazy. But you need to put in the mental effort to resolve some of these things for yourself, because I think we're running out of time and we need to be seeking for answers. Because as always, those who seek shall find. Until next time, friends, God bless.
You have just finished an episode of the Black Swan Rising podcast, an L10 production, hosted by Michael B. Rush. For show notes, transcriptions, and extras, please visit www.theblackswanrisingpodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, click the share button icon and send it to your friends and family. This will help to ensure the continued publication of future content. Michael thanks you in advance for sharing and looks forward to seeing you next time. Until then, keep seeking, for they that seek shall find.